When Judge William Bowers ordered General Naomi Carter to remove her Medal of Honor in open court or be jailed for contempt, he thought he could shame her into silence. But Naomi didn't come to bow. She came to expose a pattern of injustice buried deep in his courtroom, and what looked like a moment of humiliation was actually the start of his downfall. What really happens when a corrupt judge picks the wrong woman to embarrass? Like, share and subscribe, because this isn't just a courtroom clash, it's a calculated stand for justice. Let's dive in. They say justice is blind, but that morning in Millstone County Courthouse, justice stared long and hard at a black woman in uniform and didn't like what it saw. The doors creaked open at 9:02 a.m. All eyes turned. General Naomi Carter stepped into the courtroom like she had into every battlefield she'd known, head held high back, straight presence, undeniable. She wore full dress uniform polished to perfection, and on her chest, shining just beneath the ribbons, was the Medal of Honor. Not everyone recognized it right away, but those who did, they stiffened in their seats. Because that medal doesn't just show up anywhere. And it sure as hell doesn't walk into a courtroom uninvited. But Naomi hadn't come uninvited. She came for Maya Roberts, the widow of Private First Class Darnell Roberts, a 19-year-old soldier who died saving 8 others in Kandahar. 2 days after being discharged from a military hospital, he collapsed in his home. The Army called it non-service related. The benefits his widow depended on were denied. And now she was here trembling in the front row, fighting the system alone. Until Naomi showed up. They had met through a military support network, Maya's message barely coherent through her grief. They said it doesn't count. His death, that he didn't die in uniform. But he bled for this country. Doesn't that count for something? Naomi responded with a single sentence. He counted to me. Inside the courtroom, Naomi's boots echoed as she crossed the aisle. She didn't look left or right. Not at the whispering crowd, not at the bailiff standing half straight at her presence. She only nodded once toward Maya and took the empty seat beside her. The room seemed to hold its breath. Judge William Bowers glanced up from his bench. 61 silver hair combed flat eyes pale and calculating behind bifocals. He leaned forward slowly, eyeing Naomi with a mix of irritation and forced politeness. Name for the record. Naomi Rose. Major General Naomi Carter, United States Army, retired. Present on behalf of Mrs. Maya Roberts. There was a beat of silence before Bowers raised one brow. Did you say? Major A smirk tugged at the edge of his lips. That's quite a title. Carter, you said. He glanced down at the roster. Then deliberately Carver. Naomi's jaw barely moved. Carter, Your Honor. Carter. He repeated, dry as sand. His gaze dropped to her chest and froze. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing at the medal. Then he leaned back as if what he saw offended him. I see you've come, fully decorated. She's my advocate, sir. Maya whispered aloud nervously. She's not here to cause trouble. Bowers didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he leaned into the mic. This is a court of law, General, not a parade ground. That medal may mean something out there, but in here, it's a distraction. Naomi's voice was steady. It's not for show, Your Honor. It was earned, and it honors those who never made it home. There was a pause, sharp and deliberate. I don't care what it honors, Bowers said coolly. This court has rules. If you're not a party to the case, you will sit silently, and you will remove that medal. Do I make myself clear? Gasps rippled through the gallery. One older man, a veteran with a faded army pin, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Naomi didn't blink. With respect, sir, she said slowly. The medal stays. So do I. The courtroom tensed. Judge Bowers' face, stiffened lips tightening. Then I'll remind you once more, General. My courtroom, my rules. Remove it, or I will have you removed. Delgado, the court officer, a broad-shouldered man with quiet eyes, took one step forward. He was former military, too. You could see it in the way he carried himself. His eyes flicked from Naomi to the bench and back again, waiting for a cue. Maya clutched Naomi's sleeve. Please, just take it off. I can't lose you too. Naomi turned her head slightly. And if I do, how many will follow me through that door? You don't need to prove anything, Maya pleaded. Naomi didn't answer. She simply turned back to the bench spine, straight hands behind her back. Judge Bowers stared at her. She stared back. Two kinds of power met in that silence. One came from a chair, the other from the kind of strength that doesn't rattle because it already knows what it's worth. Judge Bowers picked up his gavel, tapped it once. "Very well," he said coldly. "Proceed, for now." But everyone in that room, Delgado, Maya, the veterans watching from the back, knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And the woman in uniform, she hadn't come for permission. She came to expose the kind of justice that wears a robe but hides a prejudice. The courtroom didn't breathe. Naomi Carter had just refused a direct command from the judge to remove her Medal of Honor, and she'd done it without raising her voice, without flinching. Just standing there in full uniform, a living contradiction to the power Judge Bowers thought he alone held in that room. Judge Bowers narrowed his eyes. "General Carter," he said, his voice now stripped of even the thinnest politeness. "This is your final warning. You will remove that medal immediately or you will be held in contempt." Naomi stayed silent. Maya gripped Naomi's sleeve, fingers trembling. "Please," she whispered through her teeth, "don't give him a reason." Naomi's eyes softened, but she didn't turn away from the bench. "This medal," she said, calm but with fire buried beneath, "doesn't represent me. It represents every soldier I've buried, every name I still carry, including the one you're trying to erase today." Bowers leaned forward, fingers gripping the edge of his bench. "This courtroom does not answer to military rank general. And I'm not asking it to," Naomi replied. "I'm asking it to recognize a sacrifice you're trying to file away as paperwork." The tension broke like a storm cloud cracking open. "You will not grandstand in my courtroom," Bowers snapped, slamming his gavel once. "You think that medal puts you above the law. This isn't Arlington and you are not in command here." Naomi stepped forward, not far, just enough to make her presence undeniable. "I don't wear this to be above anything. I wear it because I know what it cost. You think it's about me. It isn't. It's about Private Darnell Roberts and the blood he gave this country when no one was watching." The gallery stirred murmurs, shifting bodies, unspoken support. Delgado, standing stiff near the entrance, looked up from the floor. His face gave nothing away, but his hand moved slightly from his belt to rest against his thigh, a soldier's signal. "Wait. Assess." Judge Bowers' tone dropped to something colder. "Remove it, or I will have you removed. Right now." He turned to the bailiff. "Officer Delgado." Delgado hesitated. "Sir," he asked carefully. "You heard me. She's in contempt." There was a pause, a heartbeat long but heavy. Delgado's boots echoed on the hardwood floor as he took one step forward, then another. He approached Naomi slowly, eyes flicking to the medal, then to her face. And then he stopped. "General Carter," he said, voice low. "Do you intend to comply?" Naomi looked straight ahead. "No." Delgado swallowed, then turned to Bowers. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this doesn't feel like justice." The room gasped. Bowers stood halfway from his bench. "Officer, you are under court order." Delgado didn't move. "She's not being disruptive," he said. "She hasn't interfered. She's just wearing the very thing this hearing should honor." "You're out of line," Bowers barked. Naomi stepped between them quietly, not to escalate, but to protect. "Officer Delgado's not out of line," she said. "He's standing where too many have been too afraid to stand." Her eyes burned with resolve now. Her voice was steady. "You may strip this medal from my chest, Your Honor. You may drag me out. But you will do it in front of every veteran in this room, every widow, every young recruit watching online, and they will all see exactly what honor looks like and what it fears." Bowers' face turned a deeper shade. "You think you can intimidate this court?" he hissed. "I don't have to," Naomi said. "You're doing it to yourself." Maya's eyes welled with tears, not from fear now, but awe. From the back, a voice rose, an elderly man with a Vietnam vet cap. "Let her speak." Another woman added, "She earned that medal. You didn't." Bowers banged the gavel again, this time harder. "Order." "There will be order in this courtroom." Naomi slowly sat down, never taking her eyes off him. "I came here for justice," she said more quietly now. "Not permission." And with that, the room fell silent again, but this time it was the judge who seemed unsettled. He leaned back into his seat, tightened his grip on the bench, and muttered, "Let the record show. The court's instruction was not followed, but we will proceed for now." Delgado returned to his post, every step slow, deliberate. And Naomi? She stayed exactly where she was, metal still gleaming beneath the weight of eyes and silence. She hadn't won, but she'd drawn a line, and everyone in that room knew. The next time Bowers tried to cross it, he'd be the one exposed. The silence in that courtroom didn't just stretch, it thickened. It clung to the walls like smoke after an explosion. General Naomi Carter stood unmoving, her Medal of Honor still pinned neatly to her uniform, refusing to be erased by the gavel's echo. She didn't flinch. She didn't lower her eyes. And somehow, that quiet resistance hit harder than any shouted protest. Then, without fanfare, without even a sound, a man rose from the second row. He was old. Vietnam, maybe Korea, judging by the weathered face and the slow, deliberate way he pulled himself to his feet. He didn't speak. He didn't raise a fist. He just stood, hat in hand, spine trembling but still straight. Judge Bowers barely noticed at first, but then a second man stood up. Younger. Army pin on his collar. Then a woman nurse scrubs beneath her jacket, tears already in her eyes. One by one, the gallery shifted. Not in uproar, not in chaos, just in silent witness. People rising, not for Naomi herself, but for what she refused to surrender. Naomi remained still. She didn't look back. But the air shifted. She felt them behind her. Felt the weight of every silent yes rising in defiance of one loud no. Officer Delgado hesitated. His duty was clear, but his conscience clouded it. He stepped forward cautiously, like a man walking into sacred ground. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above the hum of fluorescent lights. "Please don't make me be the one to do this." Naomi didn't move. She didn't even blink. He tried again, more gently this time. "I don't want to be the hand they use." Still she stood, calm, anchored. Then quietly she spoke. "The only uniform I ever feared," she said, "was the one that looked away from injustice." Delgado froze. She wasn't accusing him, she was reminding him. Naomi finally turned her head just enough to see him in the corner of her vision. "I know who you are," she said. "Iraq, 2006. 2 Marines pulled from a burning vehicle under fire. You didn't wait for orders then." His throat tightened. That moment had never been spoken aloud in years, not even by him. "You didn't look away," she added. Delgado swallowed, his hands trembling near the cuffs at his belt. From the gallery, Maya's voice broke through, thin and frightened. "Naomi, please," she said. "You've already done enough. Just sit down. Please don't do this." Naomi finally turned fully. Her voice wasn't loud, but it filled every inch of that room. "And let the next soldier's widow stand here alone?" That question didn't demand an answer. It was the answer. Maya's eyes filled with tears, not from fear now, but from knowing Naomi was right. Judge Bowers slammed his gavel, each strike sharper than the last. "This courtroom is not a battlefield," he snapped. "This is my bench. Arrest her. Now." Delgado's heart pounded. His hands hovered over the cuffs. He stepped closer. Naomi lifted her hands slowly, deliberately, palms out, wrists together. "Not in surrender, but in principle. You can arrest me," she said softly. "But you can't erase what this medal stands for." He paused again. Then, with solemn care, he clicked the cuffs shut. Not like he was restraining a criminal, but like he was closing a history book no one had finished reading. Behind them, more stood up. Not just veterans, not just friends, ordinary people. A janitor in a green uniform, a teenager with a public school hoodie. They didn't speak, they just stood. The silence said everything. Naomi didn't look back again. She didn't need to. The stillness had already turned into something powerful, something irreversible. As Delgado gently guided her forward, Judge Bowers leaned back in his chair, stiff with authority, but no longer sure of it. "Let the record show," he muttered, "General Carter has been removed for contempt of court." Naomi turned her head slightly toward him one last time. "You don't get to define contempt, Judge," she said. "History already has." The doors opened. She walked through them, cuffed but never bowed. And though they closed behind her, the echo she left in that room stayed. They put her in a holding room, not a cell. No bars. Just pale green walls, a metal bench, and one old security camera blinking in the corner. But confinement isn't about the furniture. It's about who forgets you're in the room. Naomi Carter sat without speaking. Her back never touched the wall. Her boots flat against the floor, posture exact. She looked like someone waiting to be debriefed, not someone who had just been arrested in open court. But beneath the collar of her uniform, hidden just above the seam line, a tiny microphone pulsed quietly to life. She leaned forward ever so slightly, resting her elbows on her knees, and whispered just one sentence, measured, slow, deliberate. "Start extraction. Send it to Holloway. All of it." The audio pinged through a scrambled server and landed in a private folder inside an encrypted drive at the Civil Rights Law Office of Gerald Holloway, her old classmate at West Point, now a lawyer with more enemies than clients, and the only man Naomi trusted when the system felt stacked. A few minutes passed. The door opened and Maya walked in. She didn't look angry, she looked lost. "They're backing off," Maya said, voice trembling. "The veterans group, the advocacy network, even the local chapter of the civil rights org we talked to. Everyone's distancing themselves now." Naomi didn't blink. "Because it's messy." "No," Maya said, shaking her head. "Because it's political. They said you made it about more than just my husband's pension. That now it's about image, optics." Naomi looked up, voice steady. "Then it's on me." "That's fine. You don't have to take this alone," Maya said. "They were supposed to show up for you the way you showed up for us." "They showed up," Naomi said quietly, "until they saw what the truth might cost them." Maya sank onto the bench beside her. She rubbed her hands together, trying to make sense of everything. "What now?" Naomi didn't answer. Not yet. Somewhere across town, in a cluttered apartment above a laundromat, David Chun stared at his laptop screen. His thumb hovered over the post button. The video was only a few seconds long, but it showed everything: Judge Bowers ordering the arrest, Naomi refusing to remove the medal, Delgado hesitating, and the moment Naomi raised her wrists without resistance, David's pulse quickened. He'd been raised on courtroom decorum and rules of judicial conduct. His mother had once worn a judge's robe herself until she resigned after refusing to sentence a teenager under mandatory minimums. This wasn't just about Naomi Carter. It was about everything they'd whispered about in law school, in family dinners, in newsroom debates. And it was all right there in 7 seconds of footage. He clicked post. Across the city, Evelyn Chun, his mother, was already dressed. Hair pinned, glasses polished. She wasn't going to call, wasn't going to text. She was going to court. Not to testify, not yet. She just wanted to see, wanted to feel it herself. The courtroom, the tension, the quiet after the storm. Back in the holding room, Naomi finally turned to Maya. "They'll come around," she said, "but only after the damage is done. And we'll be the ones still standing. That's how you know it mattered." Maya looked up. Why this fight?" Naomi inhaled once deeply. "Because I've watched too many medals be pinned in silence and too many flags folded without answers. And because when you're the last one willing to stand sometimes, that's all it takes." Maya wiped her eyes and nodded, not because she agreed, but because she understood. The intercom crackled. "Carter, you have a visitor." Naomi stood, and for the first time in hours she allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile. "Let's see who stayed," she said. The courthouse buzzed with whispers, but no one dared speak Naomi Carter's name out loud. Not yet. Not after what happened yesterday. In a quiet alley behind the building, Officer Delgado waited by the emergency exit, his face like stone. Every few seconds he checked over his shoulder. No one followed. Good. That's how he wanted it. Then a shadow appeared at the end of the alley, a tall black man in a navy overcoat holding nothing but a coffee cup. Delgado didn't greet him. He just said, "You Holloway." The man nodded once. "You got it." Delgado glanced around, then reached into his vest pocket and handed over a small USB. "This is from the internal feed," he muttered. "Not the courtroom cam. What you saw online." "That was nothing." Holloway raised an eyebrow. "And why are you giving this to me?" Delgado hesitated, his jaw clenched. "Because I wore the same uniform she did," he said. "And I saw the judge look at that medal like it was dirt." Then he turned and disappeared back through the exit door, leaving Holloway alone with the drive and a storm waiting to be unleashed. In a black sedan parked across the street, Evelyn Chun sat motionless. She hadn't been inside this courthouse in over 10 years, not since Judge Bowers accused her of incompetence in open court. Said she lacked the resolve for real justice when she refused to send a 15-year-old black boy to prison for stealing food. But now it was different. Now she wasn't the one on trial. She watched the alley, saw Delgado walk away, saw Holloway tuck the drive into his coat like a loaded weapon. And for the first time in years, she felt something like justice stir. Inside Holloway's law office, the air was electric. He stood in front of a screen. The footage paused on Naomi's face, calm, composed, unflinching, as the judge shouted, "Remove that medal now!" His legal team leaned forward. The youngest assistant shook her head in disbelief. She didn't even blink. "Who does that?" "Someone who's not afraid of men in robes," Holloway said quietly. Then he pointed. "We go public in phases, first to the press, then the Bar Association, and finally, Congress." His assistant blinked. "Congress?" He was already dialing. "Elijah Morris owes me a favor." Congressman Elijah Morris sat alone in a diner, eyes glued to his tablet. The clip had just passed 2 million views. He didn't even touch his eggs. When the phone buzzed, he answered without a word. "It's time," Holloway said. Morris leaned back. "You think she's the one?" "She's the moment," Holloway replied. "And the country's watching." There was a pause. Then Morris said, "Tell her she's not alone." Back in the courthouse, Naomi sat quietly in the visitation room. Her hands were free now, but the silence was louder than any chain. Then the door opened. David Chun stepped in, camera slung low, his eyes searching hers. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me again," he said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You posted it." He nodded. "Millions have seen it, but that's not why I came." He sat across from her. "I came because my mother saw it too, and she cried." Naomi leaned forward. "Good. Maybe it's time someone else did." Maya entered a second later, holding a stack of printed emails. Her face was flushed not with sadness, but with something like awe. "They're writing in," she said breathlessly. "Veterans, widows, journalists, retired judges, even a group of high school kids who made posters." She handed Naomi a sheet. At the top, one line read, "We stand with Carter." Naomi looked up. Her voice softened. "I thought I'd be fighting this alone." Maya smiled, eyes misty. "But you never were. You just stood up first." There was a knock at the glass. Evelyn Chun stepped into view. Silent, composed, the ghost of her old robe still in her stance. Naomi met her gaze through the pane, and for the first time since this began, she allowed herself to believe just maybe the tide had turned. Not because the system changed, but because enough people finally stood up and said no more. That morning, the courthouse was different. You could feel it in the way people shifted in their seats like they were waiting for something, not justice, not really, but truth. Raw and unfiltered. And maybe for once, irreversible. Naomi stood once again at the defendant's table. She wasn't in uniform anymore. No medals, no formal posture, but somehow she looked more commanding than ever. Calm like stone. Silent like someone who knew exactly how the next 10 minutes would change everything. The doors creaked open, and that's when Amanda Foster walked in. People didn't recognize her at first. Just another woman in a gray suit, clipboard in hand, no badge showing. But then the whispers started. She was federal. Not local, not political. Real federal. She walked straight to the front without asking permission. Her heels' steady voice low but sharp enough to slice air. "My name is Amanda Foster, Department of Justice," she said. "Effective immediately, this courtroom is under independent oversight, pending a formal investigation into judicial misconduct and racial bias." Silence collapsed into itself. Even Judge Bowers blinked. Just once. Then leaned forward, trying to laugh it off. "Miss Foster, I'm not sure what authority you think you have here, but this is still my courtroom." Amanda didn't blink. "Not anymore, sir. Not entirely." Naomi didn't move. She reached into her case file, pulled out a small silver recorder, and pressed play. The room filled with static for half a second. Then his voice, unmistakably Judge Bowers, rang out, flat, dismissive, quiet in tone, but cruel in content. "Medals don't make them worthy," he said on the tape. "They hand those out like candy now, especially to women and the rest." The final word was mumbled, but nobody needed to hear it clearly. They knew what it was. It landed like a slap across the room. One juror turned her face away. A court officer dropped his pen. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God," and meant it. Naomi turned to the judge, who was now leaning back slowly in his chair, fingers gripping the edges like the wood might save him. Amanda Foster took a step closer. "This recording, obtained legally through passive surveillance, will be submitted along with additional evidence provided by both the defense team and third-party observers, including documentation of altered case files and exclusionary rulings that disproportionately affected veterans of color." Bowers opened his mouth to respond, but Evelyn Chun stood up first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This courtroom," she said, her voice steady, her eyes locked on Bowers, "is no longer sacred. Not when it protects tradition over truth. Not when it values ego over honor. Not when it allows a man like you to call himself justice." The silence that followed her words wasn't just heavy. It was righteous. Naomi glanced to her right. Maya was already standing. Her hand reached out firm, unwavering, and found Naomi's. She didn't speak right away, just let the moment stretch. Then she said quietly, "Let's end this together." Naomi nodded once, then faced the judge again. "I didn't come here to be proven right," she said softly. "I came here to remind you what you forgot, that justice doesn't kneel to titles, and it damn sure doesn't remove its medal when told by a coward to do so." Bowers tried to say something, maybe an excuse, maybe a threat, but the moment had left him behind. In the back row, Delgado stood arms crossed, nodding slowly. In the hallway, a reporter whispered into her phone, "We're live. Something big just happened." And in that small courtroom where arrogance had once ruled without question, the tide had shifted, not with a shout, but with a sentence, a recording, a hand held in solidarity, and the realization too late for some that Naomi Carter wasn't the one on trial anymore. The system was. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The shift in the room was quiet, but you could feel it. Holloway stood with calm deliberation, his hand resting on a thick folder marked with worn corners and a quiet kind of fury. Naomi didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her presence alone reminded the room why they were all still watching. "Your Honor." Holloway began, his voice smooth, unwavering. "I submit to this court 87 pages of documented case files. 28 veterans, all black, all denied rightful benefits under rulings from this very bench." He let the silence do its work. They were told their paperwork wasn't enough, that their service was misclassified, that somehow sacrifice had expiration dates. No one dared move. Naomi's hands remained still in her lap. Her gaze didn't leave the bench, but Delgado, standing in the corner by the doors, shifted slightly. His eyes weren't on the judge. They were on Naomi, and then on the binder in Holloway's hands, like he recognized something in it. That was when Claire Monroe, the corporate lawyer who had been representing the state's interests, slowly stood. Her words were quieter than Holloway's, but just as clear. "I won't defend this," she said. She didn't look at Bowers. She didn't raise her voice. She just picked up her case folder, set it gently into her briefcase, and left the courtroom. Not a glance back. Not a word more. Bowers didn't stop her. He barely blinked. Then the unexpected. Delgado officer, veteran, quiet observer, all this time unclipped his badge. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked down the aisle, past Naomi, past Maya, past the reporters who didn't dare raise their cameras yet. And then gently, like he was laying down something sacred, he placed his badge on the clerk's desk. His voice was low. "I wore this for the right reasons once, but I won't enforce what I can't respect." And then he stepped back. The room didn't gasp. It didn't need to. It breathed deeper. Maya stood next. Not because she was asked to, but because sometimes truth insists on standing. She held a letter, worn, faded at the edges. The kind of letter written in a war zone. The kind of letter that soldiers send in case they don't come home. "This," she said, holding it up, "was the last thing my husband wrote me before he deployed. He said, if I don't return, she speaks for me." She paused, then added softly, "And I have. But I was never the only voice." Naomi turned slowly, not to speak, just to be there, fully, firmly present beside Maya. And then came a whisper from the gallery, barely audible but enough to break the stillness. "She's not alone," someone said. And another, "Neither are we." It didn't take much. Just a ripple of human dignity in a room that had forgotten it for too long. And finally, Evelyn Choon, who had been silent for days, stood. She didn't speak like a former judge. She spoke like a woman who had watched too many injustices unfold in the name of law. "There was a time," she said, voice controlled but heavy with memory, "when I believed this courtroom was sacred. But justice cannot exist where power demands silence." Her words landed like a stone in still water, quiet, unforgiving. Bowers sat motionless, his gavel untouched, his authority quietly crumbling. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Because in that moment, something larger than a verdict had begun. For once, the people weren't the ones being judged. The system was, and finally it had to answer. For a moment, the courtroom stood still. The kind of stillness that comes right before something breaks, not loud, but final. Amanda Foster stepped forward, her badge gleaming not with power, but with the weight of duty. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her presence alone drew the air tighter. "Your Honor," she said, facing Judge Bowers directly, You are hereby suspended from your duties effective immediately. She held up the document signed, sealed, unquestionable. No one moved. Not Bowers, not the bailiff, not even the clerk who had spent the morning avoiding Naomi's gaze. And then softly, the sound that shifted the air metal, clinking against metal. Naomi's wrists freed from the cuffs that had never belonged there to begin with. Delgado was the one who unlocked them. He didn't speak, he couldn't. His head dipped low, not in shame, but in something that looked a lot like atonement. Naomi didn't move right away. She looked down at the red marks around her wrists, then slowly brought her hands together as if to feel them breathe freely again. She didn't smile. Not yet. Because there were still eyes in the room watching for how she would carry the weight they'd tried to chain her with. And then just behind the crowd, a familiar voice whispered, "We're live." David Chun had returned. His phone angled, streaming, catching every breath, every detail. Across the country, people were watching. Not just to see justice, but to see if dignity could rise from what had been broken. Maya stood. She didn't rush forward. She stepped carefully, like each step carried a memory that could finally rest. And then she wrapped Naomi in a hug so tight, so rooted in grief and gratitude, it quieted even the cameras. "They tried to erase him," Maya whispered, voice cracking, "but you made him immortal." Naomi didn't speak. She only rested her hand on Maya's back, holding her steady like they'd both been doing for each other since the beginning. On the bench, Bowers sat frozen. His face was pale now. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Loss. He scanned the room, the gallery, where no ally remained. The aisle where his authority had once echoed, now lay silent. The court reporters had stopped typing. The clerks avoided eye contact. Even the flag behind him looked heavier somehow. He opened his mouth once, no words came. That's when Naomi stepped forward, not toward him, but toward the center of the room, as if to speak not to a man, but to what he represented. "You didn't fall today?" "Judge," she said, voice low but resonant. "You collapsed years ago, long before this trial, long before me." She paused, the weight of her words settling in every corner of the courtroom. "When you stopped seeing service and only saw skin, when you stopped hearing sacrifice and only counted years, that's when you lost your gavel." No one interrupted her. Not even Amanda, who stood back now, letting justice speak for itself. Naomi looked down at her uniform. Not the medals, not the patches, just the fabric. And then she looked up again. "I didn't come here to win," she said. "I came to remind you and everyone watching that honor isn't something you wear. It's something you defend." And with that, she turned away from the bench. The gavel Bowers once clung to sat untouched beside him. Hollow, forgotten, a prop without meaning. As Naomi stepped into the aisle, people began to rise, not all at once, but one by one. Veterans, mothers, strangers, no cheers, no chants. Just a long, standing silence that said more than any verdict ever could. Outside, the sound of reporters and camera shutters stirred. But inside that courtroom, something sacred had finally been restored. They say some moments are too quiet to be history. But what happened in that courtroom didn't echo, it rippled. In the weeks that followed, the storm didn't rage. It unfolded with calm, deliberate force. Naomi Carter didn't speak to the press. She didn't hold rallies or wave victory banners. She just kept showing up day after day, meeting with families, veterans, lawmakers who had once ignored her. And then, without ceremony, her name was announced on the Senate floor. The nominee for Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs, General Naomi Carter. Not a single voice opposed it. Not one. The vote passed without a debate. The same halls that once pretended she was invisible now opened wide. Reporters called it redemption. Veterans called it overdue. But Naomi, she called it responsibility. Meanwhile, an audit shook the judiciary. 17 judges across the region came under federal investigation. Not for one ruling, but for patterns for years of overlooked complaints, of denied appeals, of racial disparities, so blatant they could no longer be ignored. 143 cases, all tied to veterans of color, were reopened. Every single one. Claire Monroe. Once a corporate lawyer who walked away from defending the system, started something new. A non-profit legal fund dedicated to supporting veterans in legal distress. She didn't put her name on the banner. "It's not about me," she told a local station. "It's about what I should have done sooner and what I won't ignore again." Across town, in a small elementary school auditorium, Delgado stood at the back of a line. Not in uniform, just a father holding his daughter's hand. They waited until the crowd cleared. Naomi had stayed late answering questions from teenagers about service and justice and courage. And when she saw Delgado approach, she didn't flinch. She looked him right in the eye. "My daughter wants to meet you," he said quietly. The girl stepped forward, no older than 8, wearing her Sunday best and clutching a paper she'd colored. "It's you," she said shyly, pointing to the drawing. "You're the brave lady who didn't move." Naomi knelt down. "I didn't move because I knew someone like you would need to one day." The girl nodded. "I want to be someone like you." Naomi smiled, not with pride, but with the weight of knowing how much that meant, and how much work was still ahead. And just down the coast, Evelyn Chun, once dismissed and forgotten, took her retirement savings and started something fierce. She called it the National Institute for Judicial Accountability. No catchy acronym, no flashy branding, just a mission, so that no one ever gets silenced by a robe again. What Naomi sparked wasn't a revolution. It was a reckoning. Slow, lawful, unapologetic. She didn't win because the system suddenly cared. She won because she refused to leave even when they tried to drag her out in cuffs. And now the very walls that once tried to shrink her name were forced to carry it. Not in whispers, but in full, steady voice. The ceremony wasn't held in a grand hall or under marble ceilings. It was outdoors beneath a quiet sky that carried the late afternoon sun like a memory. No one asked Naomi Carter for a speech. But when she stepped to the podium, the crowd hushed, not from formality but from reverence. There was no paper in her hand, no teleprompter waiting, only a folded letter aged and worn at the edges. She looked out, then unfolded the paper with slow hands. This letter, she said, her voice steady but soft, was written by a soldier who knew he might never return. He wrote it to his wife, Maya, but he asked that one day it be read aloud, not for sorrow, but for purpose. The wind tugged gently at the corner of the letter. Naomi held it firm, then began. "If you're hearing this, I'm not beside you, but that never means I'm gone. You were always stronger than I could say out loud. So promise me this: if they forget what we stood for, you remind them. And if they try to silence you, you speak louder, not with noise, but with truth. And if someone tries to carry the next burden alone, you step beside them. That's how we win, not through force, but through presence." She folded the letter. No applause, just silence. Sacred, heavy, alive. Afterward, Maya and her young daughter stepped forward. The girl reached up and placed a small pin in Naomi's palm, engraved with quiet letters that caught the sun just right. "For those who carry others." Naomi looked down at the pin, then at Maya, then back at the child. "I don't deserve this alone," she said, "but I will carry it for all who couldn't." Far across town, a security guard sat alone in a darkened booth. He wore a heavy coat over a wrinkled shirt, his badge barely clipped to the pocket. The flickering TV on the wall showed Naomi at the podium, framed in light. William Bowers didn't move. He just watched. The room around him didn't applaud. No one was watching him now. The screen cut to black. Naomi's voice from earlier echoed once more. "You can choose to humiliate, or you can choose to carry. That choice will define your legacy." Then silence again, until the final words appeared on screen. "True strength isn't how loud you speak. It's how well you stand when you've been silenced. Sometimes the loudest voices in a courtroom aren't the ones shouting, but the ones who stand with quiet conviction." Naomi's story reminds us that dignity isn't something anyone can strip away. It's something you carry, especially when no one's watching. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful stories, just like this, stories that echo with truth, courage, and justice. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that honors voices too often overlooked. Each click, each comment, each share, it's more than engagement. It's how we remember, how we carry each other. Here at Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe memory is power, and every story we tell is a step toward a more just world. Stick around, because the next story might be the one that changes how you see everything.